Hello, everyone. Today, I want to welcome a very, very special guest, Cami Nuttall. Cami is a certified and chartered internal audit leader, and she is the founder and CEO of Culture Lab Consulting. Which helps leaders to increase organizations' value through being deliverability and conscious of their organization culture. Cami is not just a friend; is also I'm a truly and a huge admirer of her and her work. And we are here this Saturday afternoon to discuss about the business culture in the time of COVID-19. Hello, Cami. Thank you so much for being with me this Saturday afternoon.
Hi, Rebecca. Really nice to see you. And, thanks for inviting me. It's a really good idea.
It's just a pleasure, Cami. Actually, I wanted to start saying big congratulations for your feature in the Global Woman magazine.
Thank you.
It was an amazing article, The Understanding of Organizations DNA. You say in your article that this COVID-19 is a real test for organizations culture. Those organizations that will survive will be remembered for how they treat their customers and their staff. What do you mean by that?
Wow. Okay. Thank you. So again, thank you for this opportunity to have a chat about this, because I know culture is really close to your heart as well. So yes, I got featured in the Global Woman magazine. I was really grateful for that. And what I mean by that statement has to be put into context, right? So let me talk a little bit about where we find ourselves at the moment. So it's a unique time, right? We've got business leaders from all sectors and organizations of all sizes are having to make and continue to make all sorts of decisions that are affecting their workforce and they're affecting their customers. So let's put some of this into sort of real terms. We're seeing businesses struggle. Many are adapting. Many have not adapted. I think the recent statistic is about over 60,000 businesses, limited companies have folded between the start of March and mid-April. I mean, that's phenomenal as a direct result of COVID impact in this current pandemic. The context is we have government schemes in place to help those businesses, but at the same time we're seeing major increase in unemployment. We've seen HMRC says 6.3 million people have been temporarily laid off by 800,000 companies. I mean, these figures are phenomenal. This is unprecedented, really. And then there are organizations that continue to operate, and those organizations have moved to remote working or working from home, and a lot of them have been furloughing staff. So in the UK we have that option to place people into a state of employment where they're not actually working because there's no work, but they continue to get paid, and this is supported directly through the government making these schemes available for businesses. So a lot of businesses have sort of taken that on board, but it's creating anxiety, right, for people. Many people are turning to state benefits to supplement their income. There's so much going on right now. So I say what I've said about COVID having implications for organizations and how we treat our employees and customers from a place of compassion, right? So I say this from a place of compassion because I know leaders are being faced with really difficult decisions. I mean, I'm a board member for Grand Union Housing Group, and I see how the exec are coping every single day with some of the decisions they have to make, and it's truly difficult times. So my point is really this: is that there are immediate impacts following those decisions that are being made. So decisions are impacting workforce, employees, staff, workers, but those decisions are also impacting customers and how customers are treated. And they're not just immediate impacts, they're long-term impacts as well. So we need to understand that a bit better. So it's not about whether you furloughed your staff. It is actually more about explaining the reasons why you had to furlough. It is not about moving everyone into working remotely or working from home. It is about how we support those individuals because these are new ways of working. And if I can just sort of share with you what the Guardian recently said in their article was that there's evidence to suggest that, you know, people who are in work at the moment, or those even who are furloughed, they're suffering from mental and physical stress, and that stress is caused by a fear of being laid off, right? Losing their jobs, and that's actually also leading people to feel suicidal. I mean, this is really serious stuff. So we're seeing mental health and well-being given the spotlight in a major way at the moment. It's really crucial in the workplace. And I think also, you know, we think about the workplace, we tend to think about an office environment, a building that is separate from our home, but actually our workplace is now our home. So we don't see that delineation, I can't say the word, but, you know, we can't see that separation anymore. And I think that creates challenges. So this is the context we see ourselves in. And organizations that survive this time will be remembered for how they treat their staff and their customers. So at the end of the day, if we don't treat our employees right, we are not treating our customers right either, because it's those employees, as you know, engage with those customers. So that's what I mean. Absolutely. It's a bit of a long ramble, but that's what I mean.
No, and it's a really, I mean, it's actually the reality, but in concept, what I think what you was trying to explain is, first of all, I actually had yesterday a conversation with we were talking in a different life about how to empower the HR function from support to strategic, and we were touching base about, I think, a little bit what you were trying to explain, that first of all, a company needs to have a plan. And some companies right now has been pushed to COVID-19. Well, all companies, but some of them, they haven't even think about to working remote, and that's a really issue. And then you was talking base about well-being, and we were talking about yesterday about that. That actually, I found a report that from a Human Resources magazine that were saying that in the last 4 and 6 weeks, 88% of workers of that report that were interviewed, they were saying that they have experienced a high increase of stress, depression, and anxiety. And I think more than ever, and we know the organizations, the well-being needs to the well-being and inclusion and diversity and this type of activities, they need to also be planned, and some organizations fail to that. So I think despite the fact that you're saying that now with COVID this is increasing and they need to take care of this, I think we also need, I think what you also meant is that organizations needs to plan on how to handle this situation right now and actually move forward. Otherwise, they're going to be damaging their businesses, because right now, and of course, you know better than me about culture, but in reality, right now, a lot of employees, I feel that they are not part of a team because they are working from home, and they don't have that, you know, feeling of I'm in an office space with my colleagues around. Others, they are working from home, and actually they are more productive because they are actually not in the office where they were stressed because the manager was there. And so what do you think about that, Cami? Because I'm sure that based on your experience, you have faced this type of situations that, you know, companies with a very toxic culture, let's put that way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And actually, I was recently talking to somebody about how, you know, working from home and getting used to it after, you know, a good number of weeks of doing this, actually going back into the workplace or in an office environment is going to be quite tough and difficult to do, because actually in the office space we have lots of distractions. You know, we moved from offices, a lot of organizations moved from discrete offices to open plan spaces, right? Because it was meant to create collaboration and opportunity to see one another and so on. So I think we're definitely in a time of change at the moment, and that change is a virtual one, obviously, right? So we often say we can't change culture overnight, but actually we can, because we're in a different environment at the moment. So I just want to take it back a bit. So, you know, just because and those statistics you mentioned are really, really important. Just because we're in a new way of working right now does not mean that our organization culture has disappeared at all.
Of course.
So how we treated our customers pre-COVID, when we were in that office space, whether it was open plan or discrete offices, those coffee mornings, those corridor conversations, how the meetings were run, how we took decisions in a meeting, how we gave instructions to our team, how we led our teams, all of those things, they will be dependent on our company culture at that time, right?
Correct.
So I'm willing to bet actually that depending on what that company culture was pre-COVID, it will only be exemplified now. And since the pandemic hit has required us to work in a different way. So let me explain this in two different extremes, right? So one extreme is that if your company was more concerned about getting the job done, for example, and less so about employee welfare. So perhaps the concern about employees, staff, workers was just not high up on the agenda. And you talk about toxic, culture in that sense, toxic environments. So let's say in that environment, there's a lot of blame, there's a lot of finger pointing. Let's say there's no learning. We try and hide the issues and weaknesses or problems we have. Let's say from a people perspective, actually learning and development support was limited. Let's say HR was more concerned about protecting the company than the employees themselves. I've been in that environment. I know how that feels. Perhaps there's more pressure about performance, where you're KPI driven. Everything is about hitting those targets and goals, but not necessarily the way we actually achieve those goals, right? So it's about the end, not the means to the end. Those sorts of companies will, when times are tough, will likely cut the purse strings. They'll tighten up their budgets. The things that are considered nice to have are the learning spaces, the learning and development, the outings, the corporate away days, and those sorts of things. So those are the first things to tend to go, and then you know what I mean. So that's what my first extreme is. So moving to remote working doesn't actually change this. There will continue to be questions about productivity, where the end result is really still important. But what happens now is that our employees are suffering from feelings of guilt. This is the statistic you talked about. This is the Guardian article I mentioned. They're feeling, I'm not getting enough work done. I'm not doing enough hours. They're feeling guilt around not being able to focus and concentrate because there's so many distractions at home. Their long hours in the workplace are now translating or being replicated in the home, right? So, but they might be dispersed in a different way. We start earlier, we finish later, and then during the day we have lots of breaks because we've got families to look after and so on. There is no separation of working hours and home hours. You can't leave your workplace at work. It is now integrated into your home life. So if those stats are to be believed, and I believe that is the case, people are not feeling great about themselves. And, this kind of organization that has that kind of culture where we didn't prioritize the employee and employee welfare will not be able to recognize this. They will not be able to do anything about it because they don't know how to identify those issues. They will feel frustrated with those, that context and that environment. This way of thinking is not in that organization's DNA. It's just not in their culture.
Yeah.
So that's one extreme, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's your toxic, or lending itself to your toxic environment. And people who are furloughed in that environment, they're being left to fend for themselves. People who are working from home in this environment, they're just not being supported in that way. So I think the other side of that extreme is a company that prioritizes employee welfare right from the beginning. So if your company pre-COVID actually always looked after and thought about and considered and was compassionate towards its staff, then working from home and moving to remote working will only exemplify that, because your communication increases, your stories of success increases, how the support from managers increases. Maybe you have lots more social engagement online in a virtual space. There's communication on welfare, mental health, well-being, all of these things. And I've seen these examples as well. And I think they're really, really great examples of an organization that took its culture from the perspective of employee welfare really seriously, and that translated really well into remote working.
So,
sorry, go on. I ramble on.
You know that we have been talking a lot about culture, and there is a very nice quote that says that corporate culture eats a strategy for breakfast, and
yes.
So what really means that you can have an amazing strategy, you can be a business that be in the top level of whatever with your competitors, whatever it might be. But if your culture, your employees are your managers, so the environment that you have internally in your business is not strong enough and healthy enough, is as it will eat the strategy for breakfast. So
yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely.
So talking about culture, and I mean, I want to dig a little bit more about that in this time of COVID. Is yes, we live in a society that we know that we all want to be part of something bigger, right? And when we feel that we are part of something bigger, is like means that you are part of a team, and that's how it should be when you are working in a company, right? And feeling that you are part of a team means that you are in unity, you have a common goal, a common vision, and doesn't matter if you are in pandemia or whatever, you are just one team, and now it's a change in the environment that potentially needs to be So actually, I really want to give you another important fact that for me is really important after, before, during, and after COVID. So actually, according to a HRDS professional, over 77% of adults, 77% of adults will consider company culture before applying for a role. And that's only people who are willing to join our organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're talking about, the percentage that we might find of company cultures that are toxic, so they are not good enough, and employees are disengaged. The employees have a high turnover because they don't want to work there. Why, Cami, I really want to ask you this question. Why is culture right now so important for businesses during COVID-19?
Well, I actually think that, so I believe that culture is important because it's always important. It just doesn't go away, right? So culture is a given. And I don't think it is given enough attention by many organizations. So, if people understood, if leaders understood the relationship between the quote you mentioned was Peter Drucker's quote, right? Yeah. It's one of my favorite quotes. So the reason why culture eats strategy for breakfast is that if you have a strategy that you want to get from A to Z, that is your almost your what, and maybe you understand your why, but culture is your how. Right. So how you get from A to Z will very much depend on the type of culture your organization has. So if your strategy is to get to being agile and closer to the customer, and you want to be more innovative in the way you think about things, but your starting point is actually your risk averse organization, you don't tend to take risks. Every day is the same. Your staff are comfortable where they are. There's not much career progression perhaps in your organization, so learning and development might be a nice to have. It's limited perhaps, right? But you want to move to a digital space which responds to your customer in a different way, which requires agility, which requires innovation, which requires a different way of being organized, and a different way of using technology, and a different way of engaging with that audience and that customer. Well, in order to get there, you need to understand your ways of working, and your ways of working are your culture. It's what distinguishes your organization from every other organization.
Correct.
Right? It's a program of the way. So let me put it this way. It's a combined program of the way your organization thinks. So its mindset, what it bases its mindset on, the beliefs it holds as an organization, the stories that it tells within the workplace, and and then how that interacts with your processes, your systems, your employees, and how they, it all comes together, and that's your culture, right? So it is as important now as it was before pre-COVID, as it will continue to be going forward. But the reason why it's so important right now is that I think there are opportunities that organizations, this is the point on the future, what's going to happen going forward, what are the implications for culture going forward, because I think there are real opportunities for those companies from a culture space.
Yeah, and I have to say that when I said that the statement of culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think I said the other way around. I don't remember now what I said, but yes, you're right.
No, I think you said it right, but we can rewind and check and edit this if we need to.
Anyway, I just want to say that you touched base a very good point about mindset. So right now we are living a transformation, and again, I keep saying this again and again and again. But each of the person I have a live streaming, we all, even if we are talking different topics, we all talk about the same thing. So we said that companies will be technically transformed.
Yeah.
That organization structures are going to be more collaborative. Actually, yesterday I was talking about that they are going to be involving in a third space, which means that they are going to increase the number of co-working spaces.
Sure.
And potentially a 50% of organizations are going to be restructured into a co-working space. If you think about that, it was really interesting because it's true. And more than ever, again, the culture is key. But you touched base about mindset, and I do really agree, because in anything in this life, when you want to do a change, the first thing you need to do is to be aware of that change and actually potentially change your mindset. To your status quo needs to change, right? And what happened? There is actually it's called James John Sticker. There is the change in organizations, change management strategies. There is lean, agile, you mentioned. And there is one of a guy which the first step he mentioned is to create a sign of urgency. So you need to think that we need to change. It's really necessary. And I think with culture is the same. So if you are right now, and of course you can't correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess that when you go to your clients, you might say to them, look, right now, if you're seeing that your staff is actually even less productive than ever, they are not engaged, and you see like a drop in your revenue streams, is maybe because it's something that we need to change, and potentially is the way that we treat our employees. Our values are not well enough understood for everyone. The people is not treated in the same way, and such and such and such.
Yeah. So I agree with all of that. I think there's two perspectives here, right? So I think if I can go back to so mindset is, so there's two things here, right? So there's the conversation about the burning platform. Right? So what you talk about, the urgency, the need to create urgency, is about what's your burning platform. So what's the thing that's going to knock the legs off under your house or your foundations, right? And bring everything toppling down. And in order to prevent that from happening, what needs to change, right? So, and when we do change, and in my experience, what I see is that when there are change programs, one of the things that we don't tend to give emphasis to, we don't have a work stream around, is culture. How does our culture need to shift alongside the change program, the end result we're trying to achieve? So if we're introducing new technology, then what does that mean that for our behaviors? If we're trying to reorganize the way we want to work, what does that mean for our ways of working, our integration, our collaboration, and so on with teams? And that's all about culture. But I fail to see deliberate thinking about culture in change programs. Right?
And actually, sorry for interrupting you, Cami, because you touched by a really good point. We don't need to change the culture. We need to make sure that the culture, it will take our change
Yeah.
As quickly and as agile as possible. And
Yeah,
that means that
absolutely.
we need to be transparent with them. We need to know who, because from my perspective, sometimes the companies fail with a change management strategy for any
Mm,
kind of change
yeah.
because they don't have, they are not transparent with the people that they are internally. So some people from one day to another, they find out that, I actually have a really good example. I was working in a big consultancy, and I don't want to say the name because it's confidential, but anyway,
Yeah.
consultancy was they did a merge with an American company, and
Yeah.
the employees in EMEA, they find out from one day to another that suddenly
Yeah.
they had
Yeah.
been bought by a very big consultancy in America. And actually, what is going to happen? Imagine legacy transfer of entities, a rollout of a system and it was actually chaos. A lot of high levels of managers left the organization. It was a really, and it's still, they are
Yeah.
still suffering from it. And it's because they fail with that.
It's funny you should talk about mergers and acquisitions and so on. And I think this is a really pertinent point, and it really exemplifies this issue that actually one of the opportunities right now for some organizations might be that because they have to consider the way they're organized and their income has reduced, are there opportunities to merge with others, right? But the biggest challenge in a merger environment or an acquisition environment, I think, is the culture space.
Yeah.
And the thing that people fail to remember or realize or recognize is that, and this comes back to mindset, right? Is that individuals from one organization and another organization, when they were recruited and when they went for that job that they went for that organization as well.
Correct.
So in the time they're with that organization as an employee, then they've created hopefully loyalty towards that organization. And they are bought into the ethos of that organization, its value, what it's trying to achieve and what it delivers, and so on. It contributes to that value. But when you bring two organizations together with discrete ways of doing things, then maybe they have some alignments, and maybe this is something that they see commonalities, and they're trying to get that synergy in the way that they work together. But the thing that I find that is a challenge is that those people from one organization did not choose to join the other organization. When they actually, so you don't see the same induction processes when you bring two teams together. When you
Correct.
bring, we don't have um, the larger organization that absorbs the second organization, or actually two organizations of equal size coming together. What we don't necessarily do is actually induct the other teams into the ways of working of the other. What we force them to do is to think about, right, you do it, your team does it this way, this team does it that way. I want you to go and find a commonality, and they're left to do that independently. Whereas actually, if we thought smartly about this, then actually, one culture is going to overpower the other. So what does that mean for inducting those other people, in those people that have been acquired or merged with, into our organization culture? How do we create that loyalty? How do we replicate that loyalty that they felt to their original organization when we bring them into the new one? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
and based on my experience, companies fail in that
yeah,
because
but they don't think about it.
there is another type of interest. Normally, it's political interest. Maybe
Yeah,
America want to be, because they bought the company. Let's say in this scenario was EMEA, and of course they. And I remember to have to build global
yeah,
policies in
yeah.
HR, and it was for us that we were in EMEA actually. It was very so frustrating because we were trying to make a value for our customers and our
Sure.
employees
Yeah,
around EMEA. I was managing actually not only UK, it was also the whole Europe, Middle East, and also we touched base some of the Asia markets, and it was very complicated for us because first of all we felt, or actually they felt, across the organization, it was the
yeah,
transparency. I think from based on my experience, the companies that they succeed the most is when they are total transparent to any level of the organization of
Yes.
what is going to happen or what is happening.
Yeah.
And that means that clear guidelines to say to everyone that it's going to be a merger and acquisition and explain that. I remember there to be like 2 months of what they call transition periods with
Mm.
some, open discussions with employees and trying to understand. But that was when was actually the merge what happened. And anyway, so I don't want to go more and deep in merger and acquisition, because I know, and I've been discussing this a lot with a lot of senior leaders, that when there is actually a merger and acquisition, sometimes they cannot do it public until it's actually the deal done. Because,
Yeah. No,
probably
I
these
agree
companies
completely.
are in the stock market, so they cannot say that in public. So sometimes
Yes.
it's quite complicated
Well,
to manage
It's it's
that.
it's it's commercially sensitive, right? So,
Exactly.
but I think it's not so much the it's not only how we set it up, but it's the period of time after,
Yeah.
right? So it's not about the 2 months of integration or 6 months of integration. It's actually years of integration
Yeah.
following, and the reality is that following any kind of change program, whether it's a merger acquisition or it's a major transformation within the organization, you will always have resistance to change,
Yeah,
right?
but
And
in any kind of change, Cami, from based on my experience, in any type of transformation, could be
yeah,
merger acquisition, could be transformation program because you want to standardize process, whatever it might be, there is always going to be barriers, and
well, absolutely. And this is why I think it needs to be why culture needs to
correct,
be called out,
yeah,
right? So actually doing change, though, any of those change programs, whatever they are, the thing that I find is that those are done without really understanding and analyzing and evaluating the as is culture.
correct,
So it doesn't matter if we have values. They are meaningless unless they are built in and embedded in our ways of working and we can evidence them. It's not about um, bringing in new technology. What it's about is understanding how we engage with technology in the first place,
and
right?
actually, you touched by a very good point, because based on my experience, there is three components. Well, that's the theory, and I think that should be. And I'm working very hard to try to make everyone understand that when there is a transformation program, there is three
Yeah,
components that needs to change, and that means if you see like a pyramid, in the top use the process, it will change the process, it will change the tool, but also the people, and they are need to be all the time connected. You cannot change
absolutely,
one at the top without changing two at the bottom.
absolutely.
And in terms of when you say AIs and the culture, and I just forgot what I wanted to say actually.
Well, while you're thinking of that, let me go back to the
Yeah,
mindset, right? Because actually, all of the things you've talked about and what we're talking about comes back to our attitude towards our environment,
yeah,
right? So how we engage with our environment is really, really important. And what I mean by that is I really follow closely an author called Dr. Carol Dweck, and maybe some of the people who are watching this will be familiar with Dr. Carol Dweck's work
mm-hmm.
on mindset. And there's two distinct mindsets that I see, and I completely resonate with, and that's if you have a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And a growth mindset is where we should be aspiring to be, because actually that's where you see phrases or people believing things like failure is an opportunity to learn. They're
Yeah,
not people are and organizations are not afraid of failure.
yeah,
So can you imagine a company, two distinct companies or organizations, one has a fixed mindset or has a bias towards fixed mindset,
yeah,
and the other one has a growth mindset or a bias towards growth mindset. So what we will see is actually the company with a growth mindset, if it fails, it's fine. It's welcomed. It's an opportunity to learn.
that's a very
Because you know what, we
good.
keep going back and we try again and we innovate and we innovate again until we achieve what we want to achieve. The fixed mindset bias is more about right, we failed in this. What's the next thing on the list? Right, we're not doing that again. God, that really hurt. That was painful. I don't want to ever do that again.
Yeah, and the people feel fear, and this is environment, and that's a beautiful analogy, Cami, because I remember what I wanted to say actually before. Actually, right now I'm actually teaching a lot of HR professionals because with all the the transformation, and HR was actually the last industry to start introducing technology and such and
Yeah.
such. Right now we have another problem in the HR world. It is like the HR, what they call the culture analytics, right? So what happened is, okay, let's introduce technology. We don't have actually a workforce that can maintain that technology because some of them, they don't know how to manage technology. And actually right now we need to increase the culture of technology. So
Yeah.
more than ever, and I see all day long, for me, culture is in the base. So it's the most important thing that a company has. And that's not a discussion. As you know, I'm working, and my actually golden human capital, my company, as you know, we have a way, which is the golden human capital way, and it's based in Toyota mentality. Toyota, as you know, is the first producer of cars in the world.
Yeah.
Because they are
Yeah.
very fast. And the thing that they base whatever they do in is actually what they call the Toyota way. And it's about culture. And that means learning from the example, go and do it by yourself. So that means trust.
Yeah.
That means continuous improvement. That means doesn't matter if you're doing wrong. We try, we test it. If it is not working, let's try something else. It's okay. So that's a beautiful analogy to what you guys said, Cami, because based on my experience in HR, sometimes a lot of HR professionals talk about best practices and so on. But when we talk about humans, human capital, how do you think is what is best practice? And I think an employee or anyone is it, how we feel is
Yeah.
influenced about our environment. And
Yeah.
that means people around us and how we are managed. And that's in an organization. So
Yeah. Yeah.
what do you think about that, Cami?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this, it takes us back to this point of view of the individual in a workplace, right?
Correct.
And when you bring lots of people together repeatedly over time, they will form a culture because there'll be an agreement over the way they think about things. Some people call that group think. There's a risk of group think going on in groups of people together. Where they will all follow this, the one leader and agree with what's being said, and there's no challenge or scrutiny or anything. So I think there's lots of different concepts here, right? So you have this growth mindset perspective, but a growth mindset is only as good as the individuals in that group who also have a growth mindset. And the reality is that we're all on a continuum from fixed to growth. So there will be certain situations that arise in our life that will cause us to be fixed about certain things, but growth about others. But there is, but we don't tend to have alignment between the group of people who come together repeatedly. And actually, perhaps what we also see is that we fall into line will also depend on where we are in the world, right? Yeah. So actually you raised the example earlier about New York and the other location. So even national culture has a role to play here, right? So how we are brought up, how our family environment, our community, our schooling, all of these things will influence the way our mindset is developed.
Yeah.
Right. And that mindset is reinforced over time, unless we become aware of it. And when we create that self-awareness of the way we think about things, we can bring that into our workplace. And then, but that creates challenges and anxiety because other people don't see things the way you see things. But now we're just creating awareness. I think I'm rambling on a bit at the moment, but there is a link between all of this because
and you touch a lot of things like in this life. I mean, I think we can put examples of ourselves, right? So if you are, let's say, I'm a very I'm not a pessimist person, but imagine I am very pessimist person, and I have around me people that is pessimist. I'm going to be even more pessimist. But
Absolutely.
if I see things dark because based on my experience or whatever, but
Yeah.
I'm in an environment that first of all they accept who I am,
Yeah.
and they say, "Don't worry, let's try to build this, and let's see there is a light after the tunnel."
Yeah.
And that's where we need to embrace, and that means to have good leaders that
Yeah.
embrace their team in order to you will have people in your team that it will be from different cultures, different sexuality, different type of skin. It doesn't matter. And you will also have people in your team that unfortunately it will have mental issues, disabilities, and economic problems. It's
Mm.
okay, it's part of life, and we understand that. But what happened as a leaders, and that's where I think you work more with, and we are going to talk now to your culture assurance. But I think leaders needs to understand, and for me, we can jump into the discussion like a leader is made or is born. For me, is born, but it's a combination also of a made throughout the time.
Mm. I think leaders can be made.
Yeah, we can catch up that one in a different discussion. I think a leader is different, right? I think you cannot build one day, oh, I'm a leader now. And I think to be a leader is not like sometimes leaders are not even managers. To be honest, sometimes leader is just a person who leads by the example.
Yeah.
And it means that you will understand and you have an open mind that around you will have people with different type of mindset, struggles or whatever. And you will need, or you have to lead with examples to drive these people up.
Yeah.
And I guess that is where your growth mindset in a cult from a culture's perspective is growing. If you
It's
have a leader,
funny, yeah.
yeah,
It's funny you should say that because actually I was recently doing some training with a group of people, and one of the things I said to them was, be mindful of yourself, because you are being watched.
yeah,
You are being observed by other people all of the time when you are whether it's remotely or in person. Your productivity or the way you work, the way you behave, the way you speak, the way you look, all of this is always being observed by others. And that observation might be replicated. They're learning something from you. You might be setting an example for others,
correct.
right? Or you might be different to others and they're observing that difference. But there's always that observation. So all I'm saying is be mindful and be aware of how you are in your workplace and how you engage with that workplace and how you engage with others. And I always say this, I can't control what anyone else does in the world. I can only ever control what I say, think, and do. Right.
Correct.
So that's a level of awareness is really important. And I think because of that level of awareness, I can do the work I do because I can observe it in others.
Yeah, and I want to actually ask you about what is actually culture assurance. Could you
Okay.
give
Yeah.
a little bit more? Yeah.
Yeah, so as you know, I work in the profession of internal audit. I have done so for quite a long time now. So I would say about 20 years. I'm a lot older than I look. Okay. Well, yes, it's true actually, or maybe it depends on perspective. Anyway, I digress.
Come on,
So,
tell me. You don't look.
so internal auditors are people who are well placed within their organisation to give assurance, not insurance, but assurance to leaders, to give them comfort about whether their company culture is right and desired and ideal, right? So internal auditors are people who usually look at how we manage risk, how we control our risks, is our governance effective, are our processes in place, and so on. So, but the culture side of things for me is basically taking culture and looking at how it enables our company strategies, how it enables our operations, how it enables decision making, how it enables risk taking. So what I do is I diagnose issues and I then explain them in the context of the organization's particular culture. So usually the profession will only look at controls and risks and they don't look at culture. What I do is I combine my understanding of governance, risk management, internal control activities, processes, etc., compliance with culture, mindset, behaviors, right? So my culture, so the culture assurance piece is about providing assurance through that lens of the corporate culture space. And I've been doing this for about, I've been helping organizations for 20 years, helping them understand their risk and control weaknesses, their governance weaknesses, whether this is strategic or operational weaknesses. But what's happened is I've gone full circle, where I support organizations. I did, before I embarked on internal audit, I trained in psychology and I did social anthropology, behaviors and the way we interact and engage with our environment were two things that really interested me. And what's happened is that I just, over the last few years, have combined that understanding with understanding of mindset, understanding of behaviors, and that drives and reinforces our company culture with risk management, governance, and control activities. So for me, it's about understanding that DNA of that organization.
And honestly, Cami, it is, for me, the work you are doing is the most needed in organizations, not even now, but right now even more. And I'm telling you why. Actually, yesterday we were discussing about the risk and how organizations, they don't plan risks, right? And you are touching base very important points, which is control and risk based on your culture.
Yes.
And again, we understood that, and I think a lot of companies understand. For example, we can say big names, Google, big name. Actually, I found that Google made a very, very good project that was the Oxygen project. So they interview 10,000 managers around the world in their Google organizations to find out what a good leader in Google needs to have in order to be a leader. And that's exactly what you mentioned. You need to find out what is the control of the culture that you have internally. You need to plan from the risks, but you need to understand it from a diagnosis perspective. And I guess you also make some recommendations moving forward, right?
Absolutely. So I diagnose and I place it in the context of their culture. So I need to understand their culture. Excuse me. Excuse me. Not COVID.
Take some water, please.
Yeah, I think I should. Yes.
Of course.
I get really excited about this topic, and then it creates a dry mouth and all of that. So anyway,
it's a very exciting topic and very important, Cami. I think it's
yeah. I'm glad you think so. So I think the thing with this is when you diagnose and then you place it in the context of their organization culture, you can then make recommendations, right? Because you need to understand where they are to where they want to get to.
Yeah.
And I think the really important thing here for me is that transition of understanding. So let me put it into this context, right? So if you're an organization that always says, people, board members or directors, always say, well, we're risk averse. We don't take risks as an organization. Actually, put that into context, right? So as an organization, the context is, as an organization, I mentioned this earlier, are you more likely, how do you approach your work, right? So how do you organize yourself to approach your work? Are you organized in a process-orientated way so that you're always about the steps we follow, the means we follow to get to our results? Or are you more of an organization that is all concerned about the results and the end goal, not necessarily the way we get to that? So not the means to the end, but the end itself, right? So if you're process orientated, you're more about the process we follow, the steps we follow. And in a regulated environment, you're more likely that.
Mm-hmm.
But in an innovative digital startup or so on, you're more about the results, right? One organization is going to take more risks than the other, depending on where your orientation is. So if you're process orientated, your every day is the same, you are more likely to be risk averse. But if you're closer, if you're all about the end result and you're about innovation and being closer to the customer and getting that result for the customer, chances are you are taking more risk. But it's where that risk happens. So in the second scenario, it's the person closest to the customer who is making those decisions around risk. Whereas in a risk-averse, process-orientated environment, the decision-making around risk is likely to be higher up in the hierarchy because it needs to be escalated. Does that make sense?
Of
So
course.
understanding that orientation then enables you to understand the context of, are we risk-averse or not? Are we innovative or not? Are we agile or not? And I think it's unpicking that's important in order to understand when we want to get from A to Z.
Absolutely. And I think um, in any work, but especially in your work, I mean, for me, organizations, if you don't have a plan, you plan to fail, right? And
Yes,
I think if you want to grow as a business, you need to have the diagnosis and know where you
absolutely.
want to go. But
Yeah.
of knowing what are your weaknesses, because only knowing your weaknesses, your risks, and as mentioned, I was discussing yesterday that organizations always fail to don't have a contingency plan, and it's very important to understand where you can fail. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
from a culture perspective, you also need to understand where is your culture regarding behaviors, competencies,
Yeah,
and all the
absolutely.
activities that you do. And actually, if something fell, what happened if we actually we have, let's say, a 20% of our workforce, they are top talent, high potentials. What
Mm-hmm.
happened actually to a company and if they lose all these high potentials? Is you know what that means for a company?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, you got to go back and look at what's the motivation here,
Correct.
what's the mindset, all of those things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just to conclude in here, Cami, because we can be talking for hours.
Oh, gosh, yes.
I would love to have a further discussions to deep dive into your more work in a different live stream. But I just
Yeah.
want to close this session just asking you a last question, which is, what are the implications for corporate culture going forward?
Okay. So I think there's the context to understand. So if I can just revisit that, and then actually I've got a few things to share with you, right?
Okay.
So 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 I think at the moment, our world at the moment, there's a lot of fear in society, right?
Mm.
So there's a fear of the prospect of going back to work, and this might depend on where you are in the world. Um, in the UK, we're talking about reopening schools, but parents are feeling fear about sending their children to school. Some companies will reattempt to reopen their offices, um, and there will be people who feel fear about traveling. And so there's a lot of planning that needs to go on around all of this. And then there's those organizations that have to consider reorganization. Their income has dropped significantly, so they're downsizing significantly. We've seen this with the airline industry, obviously. But it's not just the airline industry, it's the charities as well. There is no industry or sector or organization that's not been impacted by this pandemic, right? So in this context, I also think there are opportunities,
They are.
right? And I think there are many leaders who are recognizing these opportunities. And this is what I alluded to earlier. This is about the long-term implication for the way we are working right now. And it is definitely clear to a lot of organizations that we can work from home, right? There are many managers who have this mindset that I don't want my team working from home because I can't guarantee they're actually working. But we've shown we can work. We don't need an office space like we did before. So this creates a lot of opportunities. And I also think how we treat our employees going forward is an area of opportunity. So I want to talk, if I can share with you sort of 6 to 7 areas that I think that would be great. So recognizing we're working in a virtual manner, a virtual environment. So we've literally created and are continuing to create a virtual culture, right? So virtual coffee mornings, virtual social engagement, social drinks. We're replicating what we try and do in a face-to-face live in-person interaction in a virtual environment now. So what does this mean for the way we work going forward is an area of an opportunity. I also think that actually we need to be more compassionate. We need to consider compassion within our culture and how we build compassion into our company culture. And compassion towards our employees means we're compassionate towards our customers, right? And so what processes or rules around behaviors do we need that enable compassion and kindness when engaging with employees? And in the UK, and actually, I think this is relevant globally as well. But we have a governance code, a corporate governance code that requires our board members and directors to have due regard to the workforce voice, stakeholder voice, right? So how do we do that in this environment now? So how do we listen to the concerns of our employees? How do we enable our employees to be candid about their experiences as well as their ideas about how we can continue to sustain the way we work or change the way we work going forward? So engaging employees in that discussion, I think, is an opportunity. At the same time, we need to prioritize mental health and well-being in the workplace, right? So this is more than providing access to employee assistance programs that are enabled through HR. I think this is about looking at how staff can be supported through other types of programs and activities, i.e. through learning and development, through coaching, through mentoring, through one-to-ones, and all of those sorts of things. Are there new ways to digitally engage with customers, right? So what can we do with our technology now? We have Autobots, we have autoresponders, or whatever we do in that environment. It's not my speciality, but I think there are definitely strategic implications here about the way we engage with our customers on a digital front. So what are those implications? And actually in the context of not the current generations that are living through COVID, but the generations are coming up, right? So the future generations of our customers, the future generations of our employees. So what does it mean to create a sustainable business in current times when thinking about our future employee and customer? Is there a real opportunity there? Two more. So what does flexible working mean for the future? Recognize that working from home can be isolating in itself, right? So there are many organizations who already have cohorts of people working from home, but they know that people actually miss being with others, with their peers and colleagues. So we need that balance between the in-person interaction and the remote working from home, virtual working environment. So we've got a combination opportunity to combine that in a balanced way. And it's something you said earlier as well, Rebecca. So it's about being open and transparent about the decisions we're making, right? And I think this is from the perspective of creating loyalty for our employees and our customers. So if we're transparent about the decisions for furloughing staff, if we're transparent about the decisions about needing to lay off staff, or if we're transparent about our strategy and plans going forward, I think it creates a real opportunity. It creates that possibility of creating loyalty from our future employees and customers. So those are my takeaways.
Amazing and beautiful, Cami. And I love the way you mentioned that there is opportunity, but you all keep saying that we need to plan for it and we need to plan how we are treating our culture. And I love the way that you said about the millennials. What is the actually or Generation Z?
It's not the millennials, but it is important. It's those who are coming after.
Exactly.
It's our future. It's about creating that sustainable business, but thinking about it from a culture perspective.
And I love it because we don't know. I mean, we don't know our kids or the kids of our kids live in a society which is built by fear, hate, and they're working in spaces that are stressed and depressed. We really want to have kindness, compassion, and I love that. And I really want to discuss with you this coming a different session because, as
Absolutely.
you know, I absolutely love my discussions with you. But if the people want to, they want to be in touch with you, where they can find you, Cami?
Okay, great question. My website's about to go live, so if anyone's interested in visiting me there, it's www.culturelabconsultancy.com. But otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn all the time, so you can find me on LinkedIn. Just type in Cami Nuttall, Nuttall, and just connect with me there.
Yes, and again, I love that the opportunity is there, but we need to be conscious about the importance of the culture. We need to make sure
Absolutely,
that we
absolutely,
have sustainable culture for our younger generations. I love
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Thank you for arranging this and letting me ramble on.
And as you know, we will discuss in a different one, Cami. Thank you
Absolutely,
so much.
absolutely.
Have a great Saturday, Cami.
Thank you, and you, and you. Thanks
Bye.
very much.